Hello and welcome to Bunker 21. This is the first episode, so it's going to be a little messy. It's going to be a little rough, but basically, the point of this podcast is we're going to try to take some fun topics, like our favorite TV shows, movies, whatever, and some serious topics like mental health or what's going on right now. And we're going to try to discuss that in like a conversational way. Now, because we want to maintain our own anonymity, we've adopted pseudonyms. So, uh, my name's Kane. I'm going to be, I don't know, I'm one of three co-hosts, and I'm joined by, laugh. What's your name?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, what's your, yeah, go ahead.
All right,
Wait,
yeah, my
what?
name is Jay. My quote unquote name is Jay.
Right, thanks. And you?
My name is
You,
Yami, and I'm a weeb.
oh,
No, I'm not.
jeez.
I'm not. I swear, I'm not.
What, the
I'm not.
official
Okay.
intro,
It's a lot
man?
lot of pride. I'm
Yeah,
glad
that
you're
was a
proud about
lot
it.
of,
Okay.
mhm.
And just before we started our discussion, we just wanted to make the disclaimer that again, we base our opinions off the evidence that we've encountered so far and the experiences that we've had so far. So if you guys, agree with us, completely disagree with us, or completely disagree with us, just feel free to comment down below. And we'd be open to looking at what you guys think, and we'd even discuss it on the following segments. So
Yeah. Of course. We'd love to just, make you guys listening just pretend like you have a voice or whatever. Probably helps. Anyway, so
yeah, it's
sorry.
like
We're
Congress,
not.
right?
Yeah, just like
Okay.
Congress.
Okay.
Ouch.
Let the
Are
hot
you
takes begin.
offended for Congress? Okay, sure.
We're
So,
not We're not experts, for fuck's sake. We're not experts. We're just stupid fucking students. We're
mhm.
just, we're
Do
stupid
you want to
100%.
reveal
kids.
more
100%.
information? Yeah,
We're just stupid
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
kids.
yeah.
By the way, yeah. So, the topic that we're going to discuss today, and I'm pretty sure every one of you who's clicked on this video has seen it from the title of the video itself, is whether the protests going on right now are justified. And if for those who are sort of out of the loop of what the protests are sort of about, it seems like the main, I guess, wave of the protests have come as a result of the unfortunate passing of George Floyd, who was killed by a police officer in, I believe it was Minneapolis, right?
hmm
Yeah.
Yes. So that's sort of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be offering our own opinions and sort of just talking about it amongst friends. So who
Yeah,
wants to go first?
I think we should just talk about our viewpoints, right? So
Yeah.
the answer to the question of, are the protests right now justified? Like my answer is yes, the act of protesting is justified, and George Floyd being killed was this like really horrendous act, and so protesting that absolutely justified. But the violence that's coming out of it is ethically, morally, legally unjust, and the looting and the sort of extraneous activities that are happening, that seems really scary because it's involving people that didn't want to be involved and it's hurting them. So yeah, that's my viewpoint.
Yeah, just to follow that up, I think that anything at the end of the day can be justified just based on your perspective. Personally, the question that I ask myself is what's the most productive way to get actual change across? And
Mm.
I think there's a key difference between protesting and looting or rioting in that regard. Like, I think that I can understand why people might riot or why people might loot, but at the end of the day, I think that's harming and harming people that might not be involved with the lack of justice taking place and might actually be hurting the community more than it is helping the community. I do think protesting is necessary. I don't think rioting or looting is necessary.
Yeah. So it seems like all three of us have a pretty much a similar stance on what's going on right now. I just want to let the people listening, the audience or the listeners know that the point of these podcasts, at least to my understanding, is not for us to, I guess, reach an official official stance, I suppose. I think our hope is that the whole point of this is a discussion, right? So each and every one of us could disagree, but at least we understand why the other people feel that way. So it's just wanted to clear that up. So like the rest of you two, yeah. So the protests in general, I agree with. I'm much more of a fan of the non-violent protests, but no, I'm not a huge fan of the violent riots or the sort of transition to violence that comes out. But I do understand why they might occur. Um, one of my major quips with the whole situation that's been going on, again, like you guys have pointed out, are the looting and the burning of cars and the violence. And violence by both the police and the protesters. Because, in my opinion, a huge majority of the protesters who are actually there for George Floyd are trying to do it peacefully. And there are those very, very, very loud and very rambunctious minority of group of people that seem to be taking advantage of the situation and taking advantage of the situation and having their own fun with the protest, not realizing that the protest is not for them. It's about George Floyd and the injustices that many other African Americans have experienced. So what do you guys think?
Nah, I gotta say, just right there, I completely agree with you. Like, if you're looting a Target, are you really representing the change that needs to take place in response to what happened to George Floyd? Are you like, how are you being productive to that movement?
Mm-hmm.
I think by doing that actually gives the opposition, if there would be any, which I mean there might be, I don't know if there would, but it gives the opposition that sort of ammo to be like, well, look at this movement that's just burning things down, and that minority group of people can be used to sort of tarnish the movement and the meaning behind what it stands for.
What were you trying to say, Kate?
I think, no, I agree. I just think that generally, like, the opposition's always going to find a way to demean the protesters. I don't know. I was sort of thinking about looting because I'm still against the concept of looting, because you're stealing from the people that they have technically not done what you're protesting, right? It's not the mom and pop businesses, like those people that own those businesses, they weren't the ones that like had their like knees on the necks of like George Floyd or the other African American victims of like police aggression. But on the other hand, and I just sort of heard this point, like the police, it's their job to sort of like police and make sure that the areas, like shopping areas and everything, that they're safe. And if the point of the protest is to show like a disrespect for the police and to show that, to like undermine their power and everything, I guess in that way looting is a form of protest. I mean, I know that this is like exactly opposite to what I just said, but like I'm trying to figure out a way to like justify looting in the context of like maybe if the business owners are insured and they don't get hurt, then maybe it's a way of showing the police officers that they don't care what they'll do. They're going to do whatever they want. If that makes any sense,
Do you guys think that that violent protests are justified then? Do you think? Sorry. Specifically, do you think
Yeah,
riots
that's a
are
good question.
do you think riots are justified? Because my honest opinion, I don't think riots do. I, we've discussed this in the past, like privately amongst ourselves, and it seems like violent protests. I'm quoting, this is not my own words. I forget who said this, but it seems like violent protests seem to be a sugar high. The effectiveness is not. It doesn't permeate for a very long stretch of time, from what I can see. But here's the thing though. I do understand why people violently lash out, especially if they feel like their voices aren't heard. But I just can't stomach. I just can't. The idea of a violent protest doesn't seem to work effectively in the long run. What do you guys think? What about you? What do you guys think?
No, I agree. I mean, we saw an article. So, shoot, what's her name? Jay. So
Yeah,
Jay sent an
that's it
article.
right there.
Jay had sent an article, a Times article that was talking about violent protests and whether they're justified. And I mean, you can speak onto that article because you'll probably know more about it. But that article was great. And
We'll attach the
yeah,
article in the description box.
I forgot that we can do that. Yeah. So that article was awesome in the sense that it just talked about you know, it talked about violent protests over time, and it had a lot of different experts and activists talk about what they cared. And the common through line was just what happens after, right? So it's almost like the violent protests or the violent riots or just the violence that's pictured. It's just like a catalyst for action. But to me, that didn't come across as meaning that violence itself is justified, but more that people will eventually get tired of terrible things and then they'll just have to resort to violence. I don't think they should. I think that there are non-violent protests that have been successful, like Gandhi's protests, Nelson Mandela, MLK. Like these guys accomplished what they set out to do because they were measured. They knew about the political process and they used that to their advantage. And there's a lot of different ways we can go. So I don't really want to hog the time or anything. So yeah, that's what I think in that way.
I mean, yeah, I think I'm glad that you evidenced those movements as well, because I mean that's briefly what the Time article does as well, which we'll link down below. But I think like again, what the civil rights movement was able to accomplish with the boycotts, like creating those sort of economic incentives and incentives to like protesting that doesn't necessarily challenge the safety of unrelated people that might not even be related to the protest or innocent people, would be far more effective and would apply more political pressure actually to the movement. And I think that sort of transition from this emotional reaction, which is completely warranted and it personally affects me right now, it helps that energy transition to something that can actually pressure the change that's needed.
But here's the thing, because Kane brought up the notion that riots seem to be a result of people just wanting to be heard, right? You mentioned something, you echoed something that I had said, and I know that you and I are talking about the same thing, but see, in my eyes, that makes it understandable. But it makes the violent protests and the violent riots understandable. See, I understand why you do that. I understand why you're lashing out. But now, to me, I'm less hesitant. I'm less willing to say that is justified. Do you guys understand what I'm trying to say? Like,
right. So in a sense, yeah.
I mean, I would just like to comment to that. I think, like I said this before, anything can be justified, right? I can give a reason for why anyone would think the way they think they do, just based off their experiences and what they've seen, right? I think that's just for every opinion that takes place. But when I look at it, I think I said this before, but is it productive? Is the question that I ask myself.
Oh, that's
Is it
good.
productive to the change that is sought after?
But then now you're just. But that's hard now. Because the thing is, I'm not arguing that violent protests are not effective, because I think they are. I think they bring a very bright spotlight to what people are advocating for. But my thing is, it doesn't help in the long run. It's the whole idea of whether the benefits outweigh the costs. And from my perspective, I might be contradicting myself. I could be, and I would love to see where I'm contradicting myself. But it's just I can see where it's effective, right? I can see where violent protests might be effective. But I'm much more of an advocate for nonviolent protests, because I can see because people on the other side, they don't have any ammo on you. What are they going to complain about? They can't complain that you're violent, because when we think about Mahatma Gandhi, and to my understanding, his whole entire shtick was nonviolent protesting. To my understanding, Mahatma Gandhi and his supporters, they got beat the fuck up.
One of his many shticks, by the way. Yeah.
Okay. Like.
No. That was the point of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Civil disobedience.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, civil disobedience. He got beat the fuck up, and these are by British soldiers. If he had acted violently, do you guys think that his message would have been more productive?
No, because the point of what he was doing was that the point was, and I think I've talked about it. I've talked about this outside of the podcast, but the point is like the picture almost. The point is like, because whenever the news report was written, the news report that was written about Gandhi's marches, whenever the British officers attacked them, is like, these people weren't instigating any violence. These Indians, they were just walking around, they were marching, they were protesting what was being done to them. Mm-hmm. It was the British that was being violent in retaliation, and then it became suddenly like unpopular internationally for England to occupy India. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that it's like there's like my real fear about the violent protests, I guess, is that there doesn't seem to be a real methodology behind all the action that's happening. It seems to be a lot of like fervor and a lot of chaos, and that chaos is totally warranted. And I don't think any of us think that what's happening right now on the protester side is completely unwarranted, right? We all agree that they're mad, but we all agree that they have a right to be mad. But I always get scared that that it's like cyclical, and that there's no real through line, and there's no real reason behind a lot of their actions, and that they'll be violent and they'll be angry and they'll protest for a couple of days, maybe a week, maybe a couple of weeks, but then eventually some politician will give like a scatterbrain kind of speech and say like, we'll help your community, we'll try to get better, and then nothing will happen. And that feels, to me, that's the worry. And I don't know if it's a real one or not, but that's the worry I have.
Also, another worry that I have is just the safety of the protesters themselves. Because I don't know if you guys saw, like there was a video, I think it was in New York City, of an officer just pushing a protester to the side, and like she was taken to the hospital after that. You guys see that?
Well, I haven't seen. I don't think I've seen the New York City one specifically, but it's been like a lot of.
Yeah, I've just seen a lot of. I've seen two people who got shot by the rubber bullets, and one of them was permanently blinded.
In the left eye,
yeah,
left eye.
That was crazy. But you were saying.
I think like further exposure to law enforcement, which we've Okay, I don't know what the hell that was, but well, I'll keep going. Like further exposure to the law enforcement, which we know is problematic, which we know has some sort of implicit bias that runs within it. Obviously, that's not the case for the entire law enforcement. I'm talking about minority of people that might apply to, but increasing further contact with people,
Mhm.
just will spark more conflict inevitably. And I mean, there's a video of, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Oscar Jimenez. He's a CNN correspondent, and he's a journalist that's actually covering the protests themselves. And he was in communication with the state police, and like he was just saying, hey, wherever you guys want us to stand, we'll stand there, and just tell us what you guys want. And even after
Oh, sorry.
that interaction happened.
Sorry, it's not Oscar.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's Omar.
Omar,
Jimenez.
my bad. Omar
Yeah.
Jimenez.
Yeah.
Yeah, Omar Jimenez. And after that happened, he was arrested.
I heard about
like,
this.
as a journalist, he was arrested, right? And his entire crew was also arrested.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this was racially charged or anything, because he was again released like after they confirmed who he was. But there was another journalist like a block away who was white but didn't get arrested. So that's just the facts. I don't want to
Right.
color that with any sort of intonation, but
That was pretty
it's
good
just
wording,
another
too.
yeah, it's just another occurrence.
I feel bad for the protesters, because you're put in a particularly sensitive position. There are the genuine protesters, the ones who are genuinely there to protest police brutality and police mistreatment of Black Americans. They're there for that, right? They're there for that, and they have to deal with other vagrants and other fucking stupid ass people who are there to take advantage of the situation. And if they call that shit out, I would put money on the fact that there are some ignorant ass people who will claim that those protesters are being anti-protest, or they are not for
with the movement. You don't want to. Yeah, you don't want to do that in a movement.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing that I find mind-boggling. We're at this point, the constant theme that I'm hearing is, if you don't speak up, you're just as accountable, right? Speak up, right? Especially with the police officers. If you know a buddy of yours is corrupt as fuck, you speak the fuck up. You make sure that motherfucker, that monster isn't I guess awarded, or not awarded, but isn't like supplied with the authority and the force and the power that a police officer has.
Yeah, the guy had 18 complaints.
Yeah. So in this case, I feel that it's prudent, and it would be kind of expected of these protesters to publicly denounce the violent, or the ones who are mistreating the protest in their name,
Right.
But again, maybe it's just because I'm not on social media all that often, but I'm not criticizing them. It's just that from what I've seen, I haven't seen a lot of that.
One argument that I've seen from some protesters that haven't been looting, not in defense of the looters, but just in sort of in a kind of explanation, is that there have been looters at many protests and many riots. It's just a thing that kind of happens because there's just anarchy. That's what happens. And Jake Paul, if you guys
oh my god,
I'm an ardent follower of his.
No, please.
Oh
jeez,
Jake fucking Paul.
Yeah, so Jake Paul was seen apparently looting I think a shopping mall, and that was a thing that he was doing.
Yeah, what the fuck, man?
See, that's what I'm talking about. What's that's the problem with it. People like that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to speak like Jake Paul or anything, but what's to stop someone?
He's our friend.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. But what's to stop someone that just wants to loot, just wants to fuck shit up and destroy random
Absolutely
property?
Nothing.
Do vandalism from standing behind this movement and just saying, "Oh no, I'm part of the protest." when in
The thing
actuality they
is
might
that
not be.
like, yeah, but the thing is that like the thing is that that kind of happens in any protest and in any movement that's like fundamentally radical, where just you're gonna attract some people that care about your cause, but you're also gonna attract some people that'll just like being radical for being radical's sake, you know? So
Yeah, I get that.
Mm.
I get that.
yeah, so it's gonna and like I didn't I didn't love the defense because the defense just felt a little, I don't know, when like people's livelihoods are at stake, it's not a great defense, but it made sense. And like in some other times we don't, like whenever there are white people that are kind of doing it, it never feels like there's as much of a visceral reaction against looting, you know?
Yeah,
And so it does feel a little racially charged,
but
but I don't want to comment on that completely.
but isn't that a little hypocritical though? I might be speaking out of my ass at this point, but if the idea is that it's just part of what protesting is, right? Right?
Hmm.
It's the idea of that. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do about it, right? Like,
Uh,
like what,
yeah.
like what are you gonna do about it? But then isn't that kind of hypocritical? Because you can argue the same thing about police brutality. Yeah, I mean, what are you gonna do? They mistreat the fuck out of black and
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Explain that.
So it's like the few bad apples kind of thing of like, but there's a few bad apples everywhere, right?
it's
Okay,
Yeah.
but
Jay, think about it. It's like it's the like see the tone that I got from what Kane was saying about like oh I mean violent the defense, I guess, the one that he was sort
mm,
of wary about. He was like, oh, I mean, the defense is, I mean, looting and rioting, it sort of happens at these widespread like big scale protests, right?
Yeah.
It's
okay,
like it's
I see what you guys are saying. I see what you guys are saying now. I mean, I don't know. I don't like that sort of fatalistic attitude though, because you're right.
see
Yeah,
see
at the end of the
Actually,
day,
that was
that's
what my response was going to be,
yeah,
where we have to like attempt to be better. That's what all
exactly.
of this is.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
what I'm
That's what
arguing.
this is about.
That's what I'm arguing. It feels a little hypocritical to me because if you're
No, that's
arguing
fair.
that,
Yeah.
you can argue the same thing about the why are you protesting police brutality then?
Is
It's
it
just
weird that the more we talk about it, the further we're getting from our original stance? Is that happening? I feel like that's happening for me.
That is happening.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because
I
you're
mean,
totally right. There should be a refinement of the movement. Like there should be a distancing that's happening because it hurts the validity of like, to me it always hurts the, like, I support Black Lives Matter because yeah, of course, but it hurts the validity of like their actions sometimes when you have like looters or when you have like a certain faction of people, and it could just be like white liberals or just anarchists or whatever, just coming in
mm,
and doing whatever they want, doing it under the guise of progressiveness, and then
mhm.
like getting out of there, because that's criminal, right? It's criminal, and then worse yet, you're tying it to a social cause.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's no attempt. Sorry. Yeah.
But I think when it comes to like a nonviolent versus a violent protest, whereas in a violent protest you might have people that want to be radical for just the sake of being radical. If it's a nonviolent protest like a march or like some sort of political campaign, then it most of the people there would, be trying to advocate for the movement. It seems like you would have less of that spread between people that don't necessarily care for the cause and people that just want to be breaking things up.
Do you guys think that the reason why this whole movement, this whole protest that's going on feels a little disorganized, or as what Kane was saying, a little diluted, right?
Hmm.
Do you think the reason why we are on that is because this protest doesn't have like an official figurehead, a leader, a face to attach it
Yeah.
with?
Yeah.
Because
I think yeah.
if we look back if you look back on in American history, the civil
You need to
rights
have a
movement,
structure.
the civil rights movement, you could attach a face to it. Martin
Yeah.
Luther King Jr. You could attach a face to that movement.
Yeah.
In this case, it's very hard because you have different voices, different
Because
ways of
you have no one to answer to for actions, for methods, for any sort of ideas. And it's kind of exacerbated with social media where yes, more like violence and stuff is documented, and that's important because we get to see what's actually happening. But
Mhm.
then because anyone can just sort of hijack the movement and become really famous for like a couple minutes, then you don't really get a lot of like strong leadership, and you just get a lot of ideas that are thrown out everywhere. Which, by the way, like I'm on Twitter all the time just because I think it's like it's kind of addictive, but it's also a great way to just see people and
Yeah.
like what they're actually thinking.
Yeah.
And my God, like sometimes there's just virtue signaling that happens for virtue signaling sake. Like
Mhm.
it's terrible, and there's no leader to this movement, and so you'll just see a lot of people parrot the same things at each other, or like yell at people, or like demean them and whatever, as if that's
Mhm.
progress and if that's a forward thing, but it's not.
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, totally. I
I
totally
mean,
agree.
I think organization is definitely the best way to turn it into like political pressure. Like I do agree with you guys in that sense, but I think by having it so decentralized, it also opens the movement up to different groups of people and different platforms as well. Like there's
That's
social
interesting.
media, which I mean, social media has already been very well influenced, but like different demographics can access the movement easier and take part of it in an easier. Like think about Occupy Wall Street, for example. Like it's not just about financial inequality. It's also turned to be about it's also turned out to be about gender inequality and racial inequality.
I
See,
have
but I
a
don't.
point to that though, where
Sorry,
it's
sorry.
like, oh, sorry about that. It's just that like, so I actually did like a thing where I compared Occupy Wall Street to a lot of other movements. That was actually a movement that ultimately, like, I get what you're saying, but that was ultimately a movement that didn't end up doing what
Yeah.
it like wanted to accomplish, because
hmm It was so
instead of
varied.
having the specific, yeah, so like the variation, I understand the possible benefit of it, because you can possibly say that like, because you can definitely allow for more inclusivity and more people is
Mhm.
good,
No,
but
I
then
see the
there's
fault in that
also,
too. That there is
yeah,
definitely a big fault in that. There
because then
is.
the message gets distorted and lobby,
Yeah.
and that's a political term, and it doesn't become an actual like spearhead that you can use for progress.
Right.
That's my main problem with the idea of decentralizing the movement, because
Mm.
because it's specifically when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, I've seen it. There are so many different messages that come out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and quite frankly, I am extremely uncomfortable with some of them. One, for
Like what?
example, is
hmm
that all cops are bad. All
Yes,
cops are
right.
bad. There is no, okay. This is not just an American thing. Any cop, if you are someone that works in law enforcement or just law enforcement in general, is not that popular. Let's be honest here. Law enforcement in
Well,
any
because they're
country,
authority figures, right? I
authority
mean,
figure.
like,
Nobody likes
yeah,
being talked to. Okay, nobody likes being told what to do, right? But they're
yeah,
essential. Let's agree that if you are a part of a civilization, that's
yes,
essential. But
true.
particularly when it comes to America, and particularly when it comes to the black community, the cops, law enforcement, is not that great. Okay, and I understand that. I understand why you might have a certain hatred, but but I don't understand the. I don't understand how productive and how it helps to label every single cop as a terrible fucking human being.
Right.
Because that is the rhetoric that people complained about Trump for. When he labeled every single Mexican as a rapist, a serial killer,
Yeah,
when he labeled every single Muslim as a terrorist.
yeah,
Those are incredibly toxic, and it's not conducive at all to promoting peace, to promoting understanding, and to promoting compassion for your fellow human being. Like, to be there's gonna be a shitty people in every single fucking group. Like,
Yeah. Hundred
yes,
percent. 100%.
it's just unfortunate that the shitty people in law enforcement are equipped with power and authority.
although they're ideally, and that's what this whole thing should be about, is that there shouldn't be terrible people in law enforcement.
There
Yeah.
shouldn't be. There shouldn't be.
Like you
Yeah.
can't have, like, there's a Chris Rock, I actually just saw a Chris Rock clip where he was talking about this, and he was like he was talking about the bad apples thing, and how they always say it's a bunch of bad apples, but there are a few jobs you can't have bad apples for, and one of them is pilots. Right?
Yeah. Oh my God, I watched that. That was
Right.
a very good
You
point.
can't have like a pilot that just like crashes a plane and we're like, no, but he was like angry. Like,
Yeah.
you know? So we need to be like more responsible about like, that. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Like, yeah, I mean, when it comes to America as a whole, like, you obviously can't, you're going to have bad apples, right? But that the argument just goes to show that police are who we look to in times of emergency and in conflict in a lot of cases, both domestically and elsewhere. I don't know where I was going with that, but like,
No,
they're
it's
who we
fine.
look to.
I mean, I think
But yeah,
I think we need to. Yeah, sorry. I think. Sorry, we're gonna say something. My bad. I interrupted you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think we need to understand that cops are human. Like,
Yeah.
I hate the whole. So on the flip side, though, we need. I was not aware of this until like I think I knew of this previously, but it didn't really like the severity of like the surprise factor didn't really hit me until this. It takes like weeks for a policeman or a policewoman, because we're all about inclusivity here. It takes weeks for them to become a police. The police academy is only a few weeks. That is insane to me.
Wait, is that true?
Wait, what? I actually didn't know about that
Only a
either.
few weeks?
It only takes a few weeks. I mean, if you guys can fact check that.
Wait, that's insane. I'm gonna look that up. You guys keep talking.
Me too.
All I know is
yeah.
The constant example that I'm being thrown around is it takes years for a lawyer to become a lawyer. If a prospective lawyer, if it takes years for him or her to finally have the license and to finally be licensed to, I guess, do law.
Yeah. I mean, even look at doctors.
Term, yeah.
Like, look at doctors. You got to go through 4 years of medical school, residency, fellowship, and even after that, you have to constantly buy malpractice insurance because there's still the fear of litigation. That's going to keep you in check, though.
Exactly. So why is it?
Wait. I feel like this is not okay. At least what I'm seeing is that this is not entirely true. It usually takes about 13 to 19 weeks on average, but can last up to 6 months. But that's police academy.
Is there any sort of continued review that takes place?
Oh, I see. Let me look that up too. By the way, to be a police officer, you need to be at least 18 to 21 years old, and you need to have a minimum of 2 years of college education. So a diploma or an associate's degree is mandatory. Now, does a police officer?
I mean, I don't think that the key in making sure that police officers have the correct training lies for this issue, at least in terms of like racial bias and racial profiling, or just interaction with different races. I don't think you need to add like a longer, like more accreditation to the curriculum or requirements that a police officer needs for that. I think it's sort of like some sort of cultural training aspect could be added.
No, but you should make it harder to become a police officer. In Germany, it's extremely fucking hard. It's extremely fucking hard to get your driver's license there because they can fail you.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They can, and to my understanding, they have much lower car crash. The rate of car crashes there is much lower. But then again, you could also argue that the population of Germany is smaller than the U.S. But I would also argue that the strictness and the severity of the driving test in Germany contributes to the low crashing rates because practically the majority of the people on the road are good drivers because they went through that.
Yeah, no, I completely see. I see what you're saying from a competency perspective, but I don't think the issue with our current police force is competency. It's just the
what do you mean? Wait, what do you mean? It's the whole point of the officer. I mean, his name is George. No, not George. Derek Chauvin. I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Yes.
The whole point, but isn't him kneeling on George Floyd's neck a note, a sign of incompetency? Because he wasn't trained to do that. He was specifically trained,
That's a pretty
told not to
competent
do
way
that.
to apprehend someone.
Oh my god! Oh my god! The
That's
dark
terrible,
jokes.
That's a terrible thing to say. That's a terrible thing to say.
The dark jokes.
No.
I'm so sorry.
No, but I mean, okay, it's okay.
No, you're
when I
right.
think,
But he couldn't have been out-trained of that.
yeah,
There's
no,
no way that you train that guy and then he does not do that. He was afraid, wasn't he?
okay, here's the word I've been trying to find.
That's
Equitability.
incompetence.
Equitability. It's inequitable.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean? What?
Like, it's not fair treatment.
What do you mean? Wait, fair treatment for who?
Because as a police officer, you should be equitable in how you apprehend different individuals. Just because someone is black, someone is white, doesn't mean you treat them differently. I don't think that relates to competency. I think that you can be a very competent individual. Like, I don't doubt Derek Chauvin's competency in a police officer, but I heavily question. No, he has no.
Wait, he has. You have to at least.
Actually, I mean, his record and his violation.
His record itself is a big red flag for competency.
Yeah, no, that was probably something.
True.
If you have 18
you're right.
violations, you probably shouldn't be an officer.
And I would argue that you have to question the competency of the department as well. Because if they're letting someone who has 18 fucking violations on the fucking street, I'm sorry. Yeah. That is just
By the way, Amy Klobuchar was the
bonkers.
prosecutor involved with those cases. That's actually the reason why you guys know who Klobuchar is? Amy Klobuchar?
Yes.
She was on the short list for being Biden's VP, but then it was found out that she was actually involved with these cases, these legal cases that were charged against this officer. Mm-hmm. And that's not a good look, unfortunately. So
so we have roughly. So we are trying to shoot this podcast to be roughly between 30 minutes to an hour, and we're roughly reaching the time where we're about to end this. So my last question to all of you guys.
But I have a question too. Shoot. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, what's your question?
Well, my question was, do you think that maybe one possible solution, and this will sound weird, is have more police officers that are minorities, like specifically, and have them.
My question to that is, you can be a minority. You can be a minority, but still be just as shitty of a person, right?
I agree.
True, but the cases that we all see are all white police officers, and I'm not saying that it's like white people do this.
Yeah.
But it's always racial whenever these things happen.
Okay, but does it sound attractive that a black man is racist to the media? That's my question to you. Does the idea of a racist black police officer, is that appealing at all to the media? It's not.
Why does it matter though whether it's appealing to the media?
No, because here's the thing. In our society today, we are very anti-white. I don't think it's necessarily fair. But that's just the way that our society, American society, is at this point. Very anti-white. So if you see a video of, again, police officer Derek Chauvin, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, killing or potentially murdering George Floyd.
Yeah.
And he's white. The victim is black. That is a very cookie cutter. Black Lives Matter. I'm not saying that the I'm not saying that's not wrong. I'm saying that is terrible. But I'm saying that if you saw a video, if there was I would bet you money that there was a video of a black police officer killing a white man. I don't know if the media would necessarily gobble that shit up.
Well, no, because I bring this question up because I get the point of the media because that's just there to show that maybe you have a blind spot, maybe I haven't seen this kind of stuff, and that's very possible. But the problem that sometimes happens is that like black men are racially unfairly seen as like threats to police officers.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I'm overstepping my bounds whenever I say that, because it's a racist thing for them to do, but I think that's why they like jump so quickly because they have so many prejudices in their minds about minorities, right? And so my point is that if there's a minority who's a police officer, wouldn't it be more logical that they'd have less of those prejudices and they'd have less of those instances where they, like kill or even murder someone?
Sorry, elaborate on that. What do you mean less prejudices? What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're a black guy, you're probably not going to be as prejudiced towards other black people. Like I don't like that's.
I mean, yeah.
Wait.
I would like to echo. Like, yeah, I think I kind of understand what you're trying to say, Kane. Like, you're trying to say that you've experienced, because if you're a black individual, you've experienced those prejudices. If you're a person of color, you've experienced that sort of prejudice, and therefore you'd be less likely to exhibit the same prejudice onto others. Yeah, that's exactly the logic we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and so a white police officer would exhibit those prejudices. I think that's exactly it.
See, but that's, again, that's the idea of empathy, right? The idea of empathy and being able to empathize and see, and I guess understand that it's wrong. The prejudice is inherently wrong. But my question is, now, I get it. I get, see, diversity is good. We all love that. And I just don't know. I feel like the point of diversity.
Wait, can I offer my thoughts on this?
Yeah, what is it?
Yeah, so I mean, I just really want to say, I think, yeah, even if we could add more minorities to the police force, it's still a minority, and at the end of the day, the underlying problem hasn't changed. There's still a majority that might have those same beliefs. While it might be a declining majority, it's not addressing the issue, right?
But what I would say to that is that, first of all, that majority is declining, as you said, and second of all, that majority, if they're literally not the most powerful people in society, like, weapons wise, like armaments wise, then maybe that'll lead to a more peaceful society. Like if you artificially stack.
You're gonna piss off a lot of people.
Well, okay.
No. You're entitled to your opinion, but holy fuck, you're gonna piss off a lot of people with that.
I didn't. Okay, so I don't mean this in like. I mean
disarming the police officers.
Way. No. Police officers should be armed, but I'm saying that if white people are more likely to be prejudiced towards black people, right? And if
wait, is that a fact or an assumption, or like
Okay, so the thing that I'm contending is that white people are more likely to be prejudiced towards black people than black people are more likely to be than black people.
Are you suggesting a hypothetical? Like if, like a.
Well, no. I think this is true. Oh God. Okay, so I think this is true. I think white people are more racist to black people than black people are racist to black people.
As a whole.
Just a generalization. Okay, is that what we're saying? Okay, take the generalization. Okay. We're not obviously speaking for every person out there. Just keep going. I want to hear your argument.
Okay, yeah. Right. So my thinking is that if that is true, then the job of a police officer, which is very aggressive and very you're constantly in danger, and worst of all, the reason why some of these incidents happen is that you're put under a lot of stress as a police officer. So when you just see someone that you think is a threat, and that thinking someone is a threat comes from your own prejudice, then you will shoot. You want to preserve yourself.
Okay, I see.
And so I'm saying that you want to put someone in that position who has prejudices that are less harmful towards most people. If that makes any sense.
I get that. Okay. I see where you're going with that. I can see what. But then then I agree. Then I agree with Jay. Then it doesn't solve it doesn't address the issue, because the issue is underlying. The issue is underlying prejudices.
But let's define what the issue is, right? Like these protests, what they're protesting is the murder of George Floyd by this police officer. Right?
Yeah.
This was a murder. It was 8 minutes, right? It was a murder. Okay, but you switch that officer out for someone with less prejudice towards George Floyd, a guy who's not racist, you get a better situation, right? George Floyd doesn't get murdered.
Who's not racist, who's not prejudiced, right?
Yes, this. That's
Okay.
what we should be working towards. The idea of underlying prejudices is, I mean, frankly, like that has to be another episode because it's so big. Like it's such a
Yeah.
big topic.
Mhm.
You know, like humans are racist. Like everyone's racist because everyone will divide people.
Oh
It's like
boy,
Okay, well, let's
that's,
say, no. Wait. Let's say everyone has implicit bias.
Yes,
I want to make that distinction clear. I want to make that distinction
what I
clear
mean.
because we
That's
all
right.
have an
That's
implicit
true.
bias, but
Mhm.
I think that there is a difference to whether we consciously realize that bias
Yes,
and
yes,
how we treat others based on that. Okay,
yeah, for
I
sure.
agree.
so like
All right.
when it comes to that, yeah. Have we reached our time limit?
Yeah, I think that this is a.
Yeah.
I think that we've reached the end of our first podcast episode.
Okay.
Thank you guys for those who decide to listen to this. Again, feel free to comment your own opinions, your own, I guess, thoughts on this podcast. Again, we want to reiterate: we're not experts. We're people just like you, and we're trying to learn. Honestly, we're trying to learn. We're trying to learn opposing views and stuff. So feel free to comment down below and tell us how you guys feel.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for listening. And did I mention that? We mentioned it. We won't be only talking about serious topics, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Oh yeah.
hopefully a much more light topic will come up. Possibly Avatar: The Last Airbender, but we don't know.
Oh, that's definitely coming up. I know that for a fact. That's coming up.
Okay. That's perfect. And so, again, thank you guys for listening, and everyone take care and stay safe.